Welcome to the Tulane Future of Energy Forum. Please be seated. The session will begin momentarily. A reminder that Tulane University promotes and protects the free exchange of ideas. Freedom of expression includes the ability to engage or not to engage in the exchange, examination, and discussion of ideas. It does not include the right to disrupt the freedom of others. Therefore, we prohibit the physical or virtual disruption, shouting down, blocking, or suppressing of a protest, a demonstration, program, or an invited speaker's right to speak. Please note that disruptions of this nature may result in the removal from the event.
Please come join us if you haven't already. We've got a great panel discussion here to talk about our sustainable future and the transitions to sustainability here in Louisiana. My name is Alex Kolker. I'm a scientist based here in Louisiana. We have a great panel here. Sustainability is a key issue for us in Louisiana. And we have many issues related to sustainability that affect all of us. We have to deal with the sustainability of our land. We have to deal with the sustainability of our coast. And we have to deal with the sustainability of our climate. Climate change is a major threat across the planet. And it leads to extreme weather that the impacts of which those of us in this state know all too well. But talking about climate change is the easy part. Doing something about climate change is the hard part. There are major structures in our energy system that we have to address, and it is a challenging topic. But the good news is that there are people that know how to do something about it. And the even better news is that some of the people that know how to do something about it are here on this stage today. So, please will you welcome us to this panel. We've got a great panel here. We've got Logan Burke from the Alliance for Affordable Energy, Troy von Otnott from HotRok Energy, Robby Habans from the Blanco Center, and Spring Gaines from the Center for Planning Excellence. I'll let them all introduce themselves to you individually, but please, let's welcome our panel. And if we want to start with, just go down the row, and Logan, can you introduce yourself? And then everyone introduce yourself one by one, and then we'll get into the questions.
Sounds good. I'm Logan Burke. I'm the Executive Director for the Alliance for Affordable Energy. The Alliance is a consumer and environmental advocate. Consumers in Louisiana need someone standing up for them when it comes down to how much their energy is going to cost in their home. And so that's what we do. We get involved at the Public Service Commission and the New Orleans City Council, and occasionally now at the legislature. So our work is trying to make sure folks can keep the lights on.
Thank you. Troy?
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Troy von Otnott. I'm a renewable energy developer from New Orleans. Most of you are too young to remember this, but in 2008, I actually started the renewable energy industry in Louisiana. I helped write the renewable energy tax credit legislation and then formed the first company called South Coast Solar, which 17 years later is still an ongoing concern, so really proud about that. But I'm now returning to New Orleans and Louisiana specifically to help lead a revolution for a new renewable energy source, and that's geothermal energy. So I'm working with industrials and the utility, which is not Energy New Orleans, but Energy Louisiana, and hopefully Meta, to bring deep well geothermal energy, clean baseload, firm, dispatchable, all the boxes that you want to check that these big IT companies want, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity to unlock a brand new resource in the Pelican State.
Great, thanks. And Robby?
Hi, I'm Robby Habans. I'm a researcher with the Blanco Policy Center at UL Lafayette. Until last year, I was chief economist at the data center in New Orleans. I should be clear, I'm not an expert in the economics of energy, but most of my work focuses on labor markets and local economies. I think about jobs a lot. I think about data on jobs a lot. I'll probably talk about that a little bit. And when you do that in Louisiana, one way or the other, you end up talking about the energy economy.
Right.
So looking forward to it.
Thanks. And Spring?
Hi everyone, my name is Spring Gaines. I am Research and Policy Manager with the Center for Planning Excellence, or CPEX. If it's renewable energy, that's what I do at CPEX. We are a statewide planning and policy nonprofit working in the rural, urban, and regional planning initiatives across the state. And we also, within our existence since 2006, have worked in over 75 communities in Louisiana, mostly on planning initiatives that help create more sustainable communities.
Great, thank you, thank you. So as our first question, Logan, I'll turn to you. So what does it take from an energy perspective to get to a sustainable future? What do we know about the supply of energy in the state, the demand for energy in the state, the transmission, the usage? What does the information that you know of tell us about what it's going to take to get to, a sustainable future, maybe a carbon-free future? What does that take?
Boy, it takes political will. I'm going to say that right off the bat. This is not a technology problem. This is a policy and political problem. The reason that Louisiana is so far behind so much of the rest of the country, and frankly, a lot of the world, is that we have chosen to throw all of our eggs into the oil and gas basket. And that has not done well for a lot of people in our state, right? We've got something like 19% of our residents are in poverty. So we can't really say that the current situation is sustainable either in an environmental or an economic way. But what we know we can do is look at what has worked in other places. Fortunately, we can see that when you invest in things like solar and wind and the transmission to move that energy around, you get jobs and you get you get better resilience and reliability. You get lower costs overall because you're not just depending on very volatile energy costs. You actually get a lot of benefits out of making that transition. But one of the things that we have to do really is think holistically about all of the sort of political agencies that are part of this. It's really easy to think, well, the federal government is the one kind of leading us along by the tail about what our energy system looks like. And in many cases, things like tax incentives are part of that. But it's also all the way down to the parish and, depending on where you are, county level. It's about land use. It's about investing in making sure we've got the workforce to actually do all of this. And so then you think about the Louisiana Public Service Commission and the folks that are making decisions about where our energy actually comes from. It's also about our legislature. We're seeing increasingly in the region legislation coming out basically throwing up new barriers to renewable energy. We have to stop that if we want to have either economic or environmental sustainability. We know that people in Louisiana already are using an enormous amount of electricity. I haven't even gotten into energy efficiency yet. And we know that we can address that. Residents are using 35% more electricity per household than the average American. Yeah, it's hot and humid, but that's about our housing stock. Our industry is using an enormous amount of energy, a lot of which could be captured and used as combined heat and power to continue to address energy waste. Basically, we need to first, before we start generating a lot of energy that we know we're gonna have to pay for, let's figure out how to reduce the waste and start there, because that's definitely gonna be the most cost-effective one.
Great, thank you. And Spring, I saw you nodding. Do you have anything you want to add on that?
Logan is singing my song right now. A lot of what she's saying is true, especially when it comes to our housing stock. The way that houses are built in Louisiana, especially in the New Orleans area, they are older, they don't have the wiring they need, they don't have the roofs that they need, energy is leaking, and we don't have things like weatherization of homes or storm-proof windows. That is energy being wasted that could still be maintained in a home when you update it through enabling upgrades. And we don't have the funding to actually do that for homes in Louisiana, and it's much needed.
Great, thank you. And Troy, coming to you, so you have a lot of practical experience in terms of building renewable energy systems. But people sometimes when they think renewable energy, they think solar panels in California. This isn't California. It's not. It's not the north. It's not the Northeast. It's not anywhere else. What do we have going for us here in Louisiana and in the Gulf South that will help us get to a more sustainable energy future? And what does your practical experience tell us about what we can do and where we need to go?
So, Louisiana is blessed with good solar resources. We've got about 4.5 hours a day of good or qualified irradiance. So it works just as well here as most places in the Southern Hemisphere. We have really good offshore wind resources. Probably just 5 or 10 miles off the coast, you've got very sustained wind patterns that can provide a lot of energy for coastal communities in Louisiana. But we're living in a really weird timeline. Like, what's happening at the federal level is just bizarre. There's all this incredible demand growth for new energy, and driven by AI, driven by industrial development, and yet we have an administration that's trying to kneecap solar and wind, and it just makes no sense. And so what we've got to figure out how to do is identify resources that are not being, punitive and not being harassed by the administration. Fortunately, geothermal energy is one of those resources.
Can you tell us a little bit about? I think some people think geothermal and they think you got to be way in the mountains or something like that, or by hot springs. What's going for us here in terms of geothermal in Louisiana?
Yeah, so when people think about geothermal, they tend to think about Iceland or Greenland or Europe or places like that. But the country that has the most installed geothermal energy in the world happens to be the United States of America. Most of that is out in the western part of the U.S., principally in California, Nevada, New Mexico, et cetera. But newer technologies called advanced geothermal or closed-loop geothermal is really what we're working to deploy here, because effectively it doesn't matter where we go. We do not have to have subsurface reservoirs. We do not use water at all. In fact, we just need to drill deep enough to get to an operating temperature that allows us to convert the heat into electricity. And in Louisiana, it's roughly 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Some parishes we can get there at 13,000 feet. Others, it's 20,000 feet. But it's all not relevant because oil and gas and hydrocarbon extraction has gone 45,000 feet. So from a technical standpoint, it's completely doable. Louisiana happens to have really good subsurface geothermal heat resources that kind of meander from southeast Texas all the way up into the middle and north Louisiana. And so, I've had about a dozen meetings with Entergy in the last year and a half, and it only took 12 meetings for them to recognize that, hey, maybe we should exploit these resources. And, we're moving toward that end right now, and I think Louisiana could absolutely be a leader in developing, probably the most important baseload energy resource that we have in the country outside of nuclear, which I think is going to be very challenged from a cost and timeline standpoint.
Thanks. And Logan, as someone that knows about the transmission system and knows about the supply and demand, how do you see geothermal fitting into current or future energy needs?
So first I have to say geothermal is kind of my energy crush. High
five.
No problem. In part because it is so ignored, and it is such an opportunity for Louisiana, but also the rest of the country. One of the things that I think is actually exciting about geothermal, especially if there are opportunities to distribute it, means that where there isn't already enough transmission to move power around, which is currently a problem for interconnecting our solar and wind resources in our state, where you can actually plop down geothermal resources means that you're not kind of bound by the existing transmission system, which, by the way, we still need to invest in. But it means that if you're going to build a data center, if you can do geothermal and right on site, and you don't have to build new gas power plants, thereby throwing more gas on the climate change fire, that's a great thing. So it's a really good opportunity to exploit resources that are not harmful.
Alex, so Logan and I met about 6 months ago and talked about an idea that I think will really resonate in Louisiana, and that's the opportunity to take coal-fired power plants that have either been shut down or scheduled to be shut down and repower them with geothermal on-site. Because all that electrical infrastructure is there, all the transmission and distribution infrastructure there, you do not have to build it out. All we got to do is just replace the fossil fuel generated fuel stock with heat from the earth, which they give us for free. So it's a great opportunity.
Sounds like a good opportunity to me. Just to switch gears a little bit, when it comes to sustainability, you know, one of the things that people have said as sort of a counterpoint to the sustainable transition is, look, Louisiana oil and gas has been a source of jobs in Louisiana. It's been a critical part of the economy. Robby, what do you know about the role that oil and gas has played in, you know, the job market and the labor force here in Louisiana? And if you were trying to provide some insights for a sustainable future, like what does the past tell us about what might be possible in the future?
Sure. I'll start by laying out a little bit of a big picture thing and then zoom in a little bit more on oil and gas. So if we're looking nationally, and this is true in Louisiana too, one of the biggest stories about employment over the last several decades has been the decline in so-called middle skill employment. I'm not in love with that term. Basically what it means is that it requires some form of training or experience, but less than a 4-year college degree. That's been happening everywhere. It's an important aspect of our labor market because we've had growth on the low-paying jobs, growth on the high-paying jobs, and either flat or declining on the middle-skill jobs. So that's been happening nationally. It's also been happening in Louisiana. What's unique is the actual mix of middle-skill jobs that exist. So in Louisiana, a lot of our middle-skill jobs tend to be higher-paying middle-skill jobs, and they tend to be in upstream oil and gas, downstream oil and gas, parts of the supply chain of oil and gas, and construction for heavy capital expenditure projects that are supported by oil and gas. So when we talk about what the jobs look like in the future, it involves, you know, a lot of them end up being these middle-skill jobs that have some overlap. Just to touch on some employment numbers from the recent past. So again, that's the national story. What is unique to Louisiana is that we've had essentially no employment growth in the state of Louisiana since 2015. That's over the last decade. It's at least partly tied to what's been going on in the oil and gas industry. During that time, we've had sharp drop in upstream employment from about 50,000 in the early 2010s to under 30,000 today. That's from 3% of all jobs to under 2% for the first time in decades. We've had basically flat wavering in refineries. We've had growth in chemical manufacturing, so that's grown nationally by 14%, by 25% in Louisiana. And some parts of Louisiana had a pretty significant construction boom in the late 2010s. Biggest areas were Cameron Parish around LNG, Ascension Parish, and Calcasieu Parish. But overall jobs in Louisiana not doing too well. If we talk about other jobs in the future, you know, it might be alternative energy jobs, it might be changes to jobs in traditional energy industry, it might be resiliency or efficiency in the built environments. There's certainly skill overlap. Maybe we can talk a little bit more about the actual pathways that allow people to transition into different opportunities in the labor market. Just to close with a couple points about this, I think that there's still going to be good paying jobs, but they might be lower paying jobs than in other oil and gas. Some of our work with the Blanco Center, we actually had an opportunity to look at people who lost their jobs in upstream oil and gas after 2014 and where they ended up later. Still a good job, but earning tens of thousands of dollars less. And we might see that less specifically, more commonly in other parts of the economy if we were to undergo a transition. I also think that there's an important point to make about the temporal aspect of employment here. A lot of Louisiana's historical volatility has been because of oil and gas. So if we were writing the story of employment in Louisiana, the chapters would be national recessions, local disasters, and boom and bust cycles in the oil and gas industry. If we can diversify opportunities for middle-skill jobs, and a lot of that might come from energy and other investments in resiliency, it's not only diversifying the good jobs that are available and the pathways into them, but it's also diversifying against the downside risk of volatility in our economy more generally. And I think that's an important thing to think about.
Thanks for sharing that. That's really, really insightful. Logan, Troy, I wonder if you guys can just sort of chime in on that, on like, how good, what about our jobs in renewable energy? Are they good paying jobs? Are there a lot of them? Are the skills translatable? Like, what do you know from your experience about what is translatable, how these jobs in renewable energy pay?
So a couple of things. It's so funny you said boom and bust because I wrote it down. Boom and bust is the antithesis of sustainability. Boom, bust. But again, that's a choice. We have continued, or we have chosen over the decades to center and have as a vision of our economy based on, I'm just going to say it, shareholder value, right? That has what's been driving where we are and what our economy looks like, not what are the outcomes for health and safety and educational outcomes and all of these things. If Louisiana wanted to invest in those other visions and make a choice to actually see that through over time, we could build a very different outcome. We could address the fact that there are thousands, I heard there was a panel on this yesterday, thousands of abandoned and orphaned wells. A lot of those skills are transferable. Those are good jobs. We also know that when we talk about sustainability, I got to bring it back to energy efficiency. There are huge opportunities for jobs in the energy efficiency space. Those are construction jobs. Those are actually also electrification jobs. Those are certainly HVAC jobs. Those jobs pay quite well. They're also, when you think then about the transmission side of it, those are very high-paid jobs. In order to plan, implement, I mean, the supply chain jobs alone for building out the transmission system that we need is a huge opportunity, and one that I would really love to see Louisiana have a vision for.
Yeah, and I'll just say that, back in 2008, 2010, when I was doing the public policy work that Logan and Spring are doing now, I was naive to think that we could transition oil and gas workers to being on rooftops installing solar, and that's not a really great transferable skill set. What is transferable is oil and gas to geothermal. We need people with drilling experience. We need subsurface engineers. We need geologists. All the same things that they're doing except we're extracting heat, not hydrocarbons. And we had a conversation earlier, and a question was asked about whether if a job transitions from oil and gas to renewables, are they going to make the same amount of money? And in some cases, no. But I also got a resume from a guy that says he's the best geothermal guy in Texas, and he wants $400,000 a year. And I went, oh my God, that's a lot of money. And I started asking, hey, is that really what the pay rate is in Texas? And it was. The guy's worth $400,000 a year. And so here's a crazy statistic I'm totally going to screw up. But I think like in Texas and Louisiana, maybe 10,000 oil and gas wells were drilled roughly last year. And if we did the same amount of geothermal, we could completely power both states with clean energy, 100%.
That is fascinating.
It's a matter of political will, like Logan said. It's not about technology. It's not about application. It's, do we want to live in a more sustainable society? And if so, let's go to work.
And political will gets into the question of policies. And Spring, you're the policy director of the Center for Planning Excellence. How do we get there in policy, in terms of policies? What policies do we need? What policies do we have that are working? What policies do we need that would get us further along?
Big question, huge question at multiple levels. But I'm going to take a step back from that question and tell a really serendipitous true story that happened to me just last night. I was helping my nephew with his homework. It's 4th grade science, and in this hypothetical he had, there was a town with no electricity for all the devices they were running. So they were having blackouts in this town. And in learning about that, he was learning about the different types of energy that may be available, whether that be from fossil fuels to nuclear to geothermal to wind and solar. This is fourth grade science homework, and that's where it starts. We need more education in our elementary and middle schools to let them know this is a pathway for them in the job market and the way they have their homes when they grow up, that actually there is an energy future that has a diverse series of energy resources they can look into. That's where the policy starts. Because when you have those kids, they grow up to people just like these brilliant people on this panel that told you all the different things we need to make energy work in this state.
Yeah, can I add just a comment?
Please.
So,
Yeah.
so the education piece is so important. It's so instrumental. There's sort of three pillars of what we want to accomplish to develop a geothermal market in Louisiana. One is commercialization of technologies. We have that. The other is policy. We're just starting to work on that. And the other is education. And so we are working to launch a geothermal undergrad curriculum here at Tulane University in 2026, at University of New Orleans, and also at LSU. In addition to that, we're engaging with STEM NOLA to really start educating the elementary and high school students to get them to start thinking about the jobs of the future and have them start focusing their educational interest in those areas.
Fantastic. Great to see our institutions of higher education play a role, and great to see you all working on this. Robby, just to keep going on this from a jobs perspective, like how good are some of these, if someone started off in one program at, one industry and wanted to transition to another industry, like can they get the same skill sets? What do we know about like the role that education plays and jobs in the job market? Do you have any insights on that?
I'd say unfortunately I'm gonna have to say ask me again in a year, because this is part of what the project that I'm working on at the Blanco Center, where we're actually looking at the credentials that people get and then following them for their outcomes in the labor market. So I'd say I don't know the answer to that question. What I can say from a very preliminary look at the data is that some workers in Louisiana who do get shorter term credentials end up getting paid very well. Actually, we had an interesting data point in our report which said that men who get short-term credentials, like let's say a man with an associate degree, the median earnings for that person are actually higher than median earnings for a man with a bachelor's degree, which is kind of bonkers to me. But so I'd say certainly that's something we're looking at. Certainly it's also, just going back to the public policy angle, this is a major focus of public higher education and policy in Louisiana right now, is to enhance those pathways into these relatively attainable credentials that could be the springboard into these jobs. I think, and maybe we'll get to this when we close out the panel, but I think often when we talk about this stuff, it's like people could do this, the skills could transfer. There's another set of questions about how much they actually do, and whether we see that in reality.
And maybe just to keep going on, okay, we've been talking about Louisiana, but we're just one of 50 states and one of 200 countries. What lessons do we have from neighboring states or other countries? What are other places doing right that we might be able to bring here to Louisiana? What examples do we have? You want
Spring, you want to take that one?
Please.
Yeah, I see your
I'm definitely going to take that one. Because let's go international for a second, especially talking about things like wind and solar, because that's where that is happening. We are so far behind in the United States in this global transition towards a new energy future that includes renewable resources. CPEX has actually sponsored trips to Denmark, to Germany, to look at how they do offshore wind internationally and how we can bring that back to Louisiana as part of what may be part of our wind future, whether that be offshore, land-based, or nearshore. And we've brought legislators, we've brought business leaders, we've brought subject matter experts, just to see what kinds of things that we can learn from our international partners and how we can use that and translate that into our offshore wind roadmap that we're actually project managing at CPEX.
Thanks. And Logan, please.
Sure. Surprising no one, I'm going to talk about the affordability side of all of this. So thinking about, for example, you said earlier, we're not California. Okay, we're not California, that's true. One of the things that we could learn from California, however, is as they have transitioned to more renewable energy, that has actually, and more demand-side programs, that has been able to reduce strain on the grid, which reduces congestion costs, which reduces bills overall. But they've also not said, that's all we can do. They've also thought about this from a, what do people need? So for example, in California, they also have percentage of income utility programs, which says we're going to cap the amount of money that you have to spend or that you can spend on keeping, your air conditioning on at 6%, rather than saying, good luck. And so we can't just think about any of these policies kind of in their own silos. We have to think about how each one impacts different kinds of folks and what we can do to make sure that everybody has access, because it's wild to me to live in an energy state like Louisiana and know how many people can't afford energy.
Wow, fascinating.
Yeah,
Troy,
just
and then-
one quick comment. So
Yeah.
I testified to the city council yesterday about their DER, which is Demand and Energy Response Program. They're trying to hire the best expert in the country to advise them on how to implement a VPP, program in New Orleans. And it just reminds me of Puerto Rico that is really interested in moving into virtual power plants because they're affected by natural disasters in the same way we are in New Orleans. And they don't have a lot of land in the same way we are in New Orleans. So what's the best way to do this? Put solar on roofs, put batteries in the garages, and let's make a virtual power plant so we can have resilience and we don't have to build a lot of new large power plant capacity.
Thanks. And Spring, you seem like you've got some thoughts on all of this.
Oh yeah, I am bouncing into this. Especially with the Puerto Rico piece. It's a really interesting comparison between Louisiana and Puerto Rico because of the way that we have natural disasters. After Hurricane Maria, Puerto Rico really looked into microgrids, which also virtual power plants feed into, like these islands that can actually sustain and create energy when the lights go out, when there is no grid. And we can still have these critical resources like hospitals or nursing homes, people who need to have their medicine cold in their fridges. Those are ways we can still have energy when we have no power, because they had the sun, they had the batteries, they were able to store that, and now they have demand response, right? So using Puerto Rico as a test case of what could happen in Louisiana with our HERO program is really interesting and exciting.
Great. And Robby, it looked like you were getting ready for some comments as well, so please share.
I didn't have too much to add. Just the mention of affordability did make me think back to, I know I threw out some numbers about our less than stellar job numbers recently. And part of that I think is like, we've already talked about wages, but quality of life is a big issue that affects migration and job numbers. And cost of living is a big issue too. And we have some serious issues there, whether it's the affordability of just housing, insurance, or electricity.
Yeah. The other thing that I've noticed is, and others have noticed too, we're actually in the middle of an energy transition, whether we like it or not, right? So we think of this as an energy state and an oil state, but we're actually producing far less oil than we were, 40, 50 years ago. In the 1980s, Louisiana was about 6% of U.S. oil production. Now we're less than 1%. And that's both because we've dropped, but also because other places like Texas, have increased. So if you look at how we use energy and our sources of utilizations of fossil energy, it's gone from a place that used to be focused very much on drilling to one that's now focused more on refining or export. So that does not include offshore. Offshore is, so Logan, you want to chime in on this?
Sure. If production of those fossil fuels has fallen in any measure, whether onshore or offshore, what we also know in terms of transition is how that energy, how those hydrocarbons are being used has also changed. So a lot of the natural gas that is produced in the Permian, for example, is being brought to Louisiana for a number of things: to liquefy and send overseas, to to turn into hydrogen or ammonia for the agricultural industries to be shipped up the Mississippi to the middle of the country, and also to run power plants. We already generate over 75% of our electricity using natural gas. That is before this new, an extreme number of new natural gas-fired power plants have been announced to be built in Louisiana in the next number of years. That pushes us further and further into the using it, but not getting much benefit out of it, right? If we're exporting both the LNG and the products that come out of methane, and then we're burning it to create electricity, and again, I come back to that eggs in a basket, you get real vulnerable when those eggs go bad. And it's going to be really important for us. I heard the word diversify. That is so important because when the cost of natural gas goes up, it will cause those boom and bust cycles in terms of all of the jobs at LNG facilities and all of the jobs at petrochemical facilities and drive up everybody's utility bills. So we have to think about how we can diversify, and that's why I think the idea of renewable energy and efficiency is so exciting because we got to move away from the same old, same old.
Troy, can...
Yeah, I'll just say, Logan, you just said if the cost of natural gas goes up. It's not if, it's when. And it's going up now. Just look at your bills, right? I mean, like, we're paying more for electricity. The EIA says we're going to be increasing, from $3.50 to $5 and $6 a million BTU in the next couple of years. We're, tripling our LNG exports. And if you ask a gas manufacturer, if I can sell a unit of gas, of natural gas, to Croatia for $9 a million BTU, or I can sell that same to $3 to a Louisiana company, sorry, it's $9 now. It's an international export, driven economy. And so, and the more you start using a particular energy source, then the laws of supply and demand come in play. And it's like, oh, you want all of our stuff? Guess what? The price is going up.
Yeah,
so
it actually becomes an interesting issue for the rest of the world on energy security because places now more and more are depending on gas exports that come from Louisiana or Texas. So in some ways we used to think about the U.S. depending on energy security and energy supplies from the rest of the world, and now the rest of the world is depending on energy security from the U.S. and from the Gulf, which is sort of an interesting thing that Logan has something to say about.
Well, I mean, we're talking about energy security on the macro level, but let's talk about the micro level. How many people in Louisiana, I know I sound like a broken record, already can't pay their utility bills, right? They're effectively, because of what Troy was describing on the international market, effectively residents who are depending on electricity that comes from a mostly natural gas grid are in competition for folks in Croatia who can pay more, who are choosing to ship our natural gas there. So that instability is here already.
Great, thanks. We've got this has been great. I want to hear from the audience. I think that there is a mechanism where people have been able to submit questions via the app. So can we hear the questions? I can't see them.
Okay, I have the questions here.
Yeah, please.
First question says, can the panel talk to the role landfill gas and municipal solid waste to RNG play into the sustainable energy future?
So there are some efforts underway, principally with the large waste hauling companies like Waste Management and Republic, to maximize those fugitive gas emissions. There probably could be a lot more effort in that regard, but some of the technologies take a long time to put online. There's a lot of regulatory processes to go through and permitting applications, but it's something that you start to see popping up here and there, but I think there could be a lot more investment in that sector.
Can I say something tangential to that as well?
Please.
The use of brownfields, which I think is a very interesting land use question. So these are areas that were impacted by pollution that we're trying to regenerate into something new. And there has been thought about using brownfields for things like community solar. And the term we're hearing is bright field in that area. And the use of community solar means that we have a solar unit, which is smaller than utility solar, that operates like residential. So you don't have to have the panels on your roof. You can have an array that you subscribe into for solar, which is a really new frontier for Louisiana. We're trying to up and running through our green bank here in Louisiana, and using brownfields as those sites is a 1-2 punch.
Yep.
Excellent, excellent. Can we get another question, please?
Yes. So we have next one. Geothermal often gets overlooked compared to the solar, wind, and hydrogen. From a supply chain perspective, what's missing to make geothermal more viable, especially in the U.S.?
Absolutely nothing. We have cement, we have steel, we have drilling expertise, we have subsurface engineers, we have heat. Capital is going to be interesting. Louisiana is not flush with tons of this type of institutional capital, but if you've got good economics supporting the structure of your transaction, the money will come.
Can I point out something that is missing?
Please.
Policy to drive it. So
Fair.
most states that have a lot of renewable energy have something called a renewable portfolio standard. We don't, apart from the city of New Orleans,
Right.
we don't have that in Louisiana, which would drive value in something like geothermal.
That's fair.
And what is a just tell, can you go and,
A renewable portfolio standard effectively directs all generation or all generators of power to increase the amounts of power that they're selling to their customers, increase the amounts that are coming from renewable sources. Increasingly, states are moving from 50% to 100%. Some states are also including nuclear and other resources alongside the traditional solar, wind, and geothermal.
Yeah, what we don't have is an RPS. What we do have are organizations like the Louisiana Energy Users Group, that is a, membership of 26 of the large industrial plant owners that are asking for renewable energy. Mm-hmm. They want to do it inside the fence because energy is short on power. They're absolutely short on renewables. So you've got corporations driving demand, which in the lack of having an RPS is a good secondary opportunity to drive policy.
Yeah, like bouncing in on that, Logan mentioned earlier that 70% of our consumption in Louisiana is through natural gas as far as our portfolio, or up. Renewables is 4%. Like, that's an extreme difference in figures, right? But if we have something like an RPS that encourages the use of more renewables in Louisiana, and if we have the policies that back that, then we can start evening out some of those numbers. And I also think that the communication we have about renewables needs to change. The messaging here is incredibly important. One of the things we heard in our last session is that renewables are not reliable. And that's the reason why we're not using them the way we're using natural gas or oil or traditional energy resources. Because wind and solar is intermittent. Or, as I'm quoting correctly, the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow, right? But the fact that we're using that as the narrative to try to defeat these resources is counterproductive when we need more energy now more than ever.
and just keep it on this sort of communication front. What can we do to improve communication about what it would take to move to a zero carbon future? Or a low carbon or zero carbon future? What is it going to take in terms of improved communication, or maybe better? What do we need to say better, or what do we need to do to listen better?
Well, I think where Spring started earlier, looking at education, at the young kids.
STEM level.
Yeah, STEM level, kids in middle and high school, even grade school, as Spring pointed out. Because you think about what kids envision as their future. If the only things that they're learning about in middle and high school as job futures are related to petroleum engineering or offshore oil and gas, that is how you might envision your future. But if you're learning through your school and through your community about other kinds of jobs and about other opportunities, you might actually envision that for yourself. So we need to be investing in our education system in order to get there.
Great, thanks. Troy, do you want
Yeah, I'll just leave its last note. Look, climate change can be a bit overwhelming. It's one of the reasons we haven't made a lot of progress. It's a monumental challenge. It's global. But I will tell you this. each of us as individuals, and I'm probably reading your mission statement here, Logan, but like little things matter when they add up, right? I mean, use efficient lighting, right? Maybe use a smart thermostat. Maybe drive a little less, ride your bicycle. Like, you would be surprised at how much a lot of little things add up to have a really big impact. So we do have power as individuals. Let's exercise it.
Thanks. And I want to ask Robby, actually, in terms of communication, because one thing that policymakers are always concerned about is what does this mean about jobs, and will people in the state be able to get employment? What can we do? What could be done? Like, if you were trying to educate a policymaker, if you wanted them to hear a message or maybe just a set of data, what would that be in terms of, like, jobs for a sustainable energy transition? If you could tell a policymaker, in a minute or two, what would you tell them?
Yeah, I actually think that that's a really hard thing because, especially in the minute or two part, and I think that and not
Spoken like a true PhD.
I'm not going to go off for 10 minutes on this, but we often end up talking about jobs. I think we often use the concept of jobs instrumentally because it's like, oh, there's going to be all these jobs in renewables. Let's do it. That's what helps create the political will. I actually wonder. I think we've been doing that for a long time, and I am starting to wonder, like, how effective that is or has been, especially in Louisiana. If we have all these policy barriers that we obviously haven't gone down the pathway that we could go down. So if I was really trying to do it, I would try to be a little bit more honest and straightforward, and frankly, like, more direct about the jobs that we actually have. I mean, that's literally why I went into here's the past 10 years of data part in my part of the panel.
Okay, great. I think we've got time for maybe one more audience question, and then we'll wrap up. Do we have one more audience question back there?
Yes. What changes should be made to bring the cost of solar installation down to parity with that of global peers? For example, Australia, where it costs 1/3 of here.
So a lot of it is permitting reform. So if we can figure out a way to apply lessons learned from other countries that are doing it smarter, that's one thing. And then, we've got crazy tariffs against solar manufacturers, which really needs to go away because it doesn't matter where they're manufactured as long as we're deploying clean energy. Ultimately, we should transition to a clean tech manufacturing hub in the U.S., but in the meantime, don't penalize people that are trying to do clean energy by tariffing them because they're made overseas.
It's not just the tariffs, it's the fiat concerns, right? So the latest budget bill really put a hamper, especially on the solar industry, because most of those panels come from China. So it's
FEOC.
almost, yeah.
And many of them that technology was originally invented here decades ago.
And to stymie your own market because it's not domestic yet, when you're trying to have a more sustainable future, is, once again, counterproductive. If you want to be productive, you want to have these economic chances to create domestically, then why take away the tax credits? Why take away the ability to manufacture? Why reduce the kind of funding we could have to have more programs? You are shooting yourself in your own foot.
Yeah, we're living in the dumbest timeline ever.
Also, I just want to point out, we continue to put money into an incredibly mature industry that is oil and gas. The amount of giveaways or incentives via tax credits, royalty relief, other programs, the amount of money, there's a report that just came out recently, it's roughly $35 billion a year. Right now, the U.S. is in one way or another subsidizing the oil and gas industry. If we were doing that with, I don't know, all of the things that we've been talking about up here, we might be headed in a different direction.
All right. Well, we're getting close to the end. I want to give everyone just kind of a final thought, and I might just ask you, each of you this, just go down to the row from Spring to Logan. What are you going to do in the next year? We've got a lot of work that needs to be done. What are you going to do in the next year?
Getting hyper-local. So what we're doing is actually going to the municipal level, going to North Louisiana, Southeast Louisiana, Southwest Louisiana, Central, going to your Alexandria, your Monroe, your Shreveport, down to your Abbeyvilles, right? And figuring out what do they need as far as resources? Have they been hearing what's going on with our energy addition, if we're going to use the thing we have in Louisiana? And what can we do to help fill those gaps to ensure they're reaching a future that is beneficial to them? So we're talking to mayors, parish presidents, police juries. That's what I'm doing for the next 3-6 months.
Robby?
I guess a couple things. I mean, one, going back to some of the comments about jobs, even at this conference, we've, the issue of like $100 billion of capital expenditure and how large oil and gas projects are. We often end up talking about jobs in terms of multipliers. I think that we have like this huge distortion that we have these like pumped up jobs numbers, but like actually, Logan, you brought up subsidies. We have very few studies that look at what we get in return for those kind of subsidies that go on. So if there's anything I'll be doing, it's be pushing on opportunities to create that kind of information. And then the other thing is, we talked about middle skill jobs and education pathways into them, and I think we probably will be looking at some data on that over the next year.
Troy?
Yeah, so I'll use a sports analogy. Like, I'm tired of playing small ball. I'm ready to swing for the fence. Like, I'm going to try to develop the largest geothermal energy project in the United States of America, in North Louisiana, to support the Meta project, and it'll be by far the largest renewable energy project in the history of Louisiana at $2.5 billion. I want everybody to support that effort and do what you can to talk about the importance of developing a geothermal marketplace in Louisiana.
All right, rooting for you on that. Logan?
Yeah, so I'm going to work to make the Louisiana Public Service Commission a household name. This is the agency here in the state that is elected, 5 elected people who make decisions about where our electricity comes from, how much it costs, and what kinds of programs we can have to help people manage their bills. There are 2 seats open on the Public Service Commission next year, and so I'm going to spend the year talking about that.
All right, and I'm going to be looking at the energy transition here in Louisiana and our overlap between energy security and our climate security. And with that, I want to say thank you to all for coming. Thanks so much to our panel. I think that we had a great session. There were a lot of conversations. There's that started here. There's a happy hour, I think, in an hour, so I hope we can continue those conversations there. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this session. Our next session in this space will be the materials behind the mission, infrastructure solutions for a changing energy landscape, scheduled to start at 4 p.m.